Okay, is it on? Yeah. Good morning. Excited to be here. To wake you up a little bit in the morning, and I talked about that a lot. I try to summarize modern IT strategy in 2 minutes for you, which you hopefully enjoy. We need the sound.
Risita, ¿qué? Ve por la paellera. Venga, que las 2 de la tarde ya están aquí. Miren, bañador, en las chanclas. Todo despeinado porque no me dio tiempo nada ponerme las chanclas y el bañador. Voy a la playa, había subido la marea. ¿Y tú? ¿Y tú? Había subido la marea y encontré una paella. Y la encontré porque estaba la paellera agarrada metida entre las piedras de chipiones del faro. Y cuando entro en el restaurante me ve el cocinero con una paellera y a ver la vende paellera. ¡Asómate! ¡Mira dónde llega el agua! Llegaba el agua hasta el restaurante. Había subido la marea. ¿Y tú? ¡Ay, qué hacemos ahora! Con los 2 sacos de arroz. ¡Ay, llama para Sevilla! ¡Llama a Sevilla que traigo paella! ¡Ay, tú y yo con el bañador con la paella! ¡El cocinero! No veas, para Sevilla. Y al último, que cuando ya salió la bien de regla, estamos llorando los dos. Me cobró el tío la paella. Me cobró a 500 metros y ya no fui más.
Now to the real talk. So how convinced is killing open standards? Yeah, this is who I am. I work for a German-based, Nuremberg-based company named Netways, and we're also doing iSinga, the monitoring software. I'm heavily involved in the DevOps Days movement, which I really appreciate being the first time in Oslo this year. And you can find me on Twitter using gethash if you want to. So where's my background? I started as a Solaris admin. If I told that the young apprenticeship in my company, they say grandpa is telling war stories again. So I started, 22 years ago at a big reseller at the time in Europe, which is now broke. I came into the Oracle DBA business for some reason. I think the reason was there was nobody else in charge to do it. And then I ended up in an open source company about 14 years ago. And there's a pretty much high chance I will retire there. Means I'm 42 now. If I don't go tomorrow, I get no other job. And I really like it there. So I love my job, and there's the reason I will stay there. So what's my motivation for the talk? So why I'm trying to open your eyes a little bit or getting into my perspective for the open standard stuff. I think one reason is I'm old, because I think when you are in that industry for a couple of years, you learned and accept that there's a new hype coming up every 5 years where everybody tells you this is the new thing and everything you learned before is crap. And we as an industry have a very big talent in reinventing all the time everything and forget what we have learned before, which is the engine of our industry. So in some point it's good because we make money out of it, but in some way it's stupid that we forget everything we learned previously. So I'm a little bit curious about what we achieved perhaps 10, 15 years ago, where we are heading now. Another thing that, of course, when I was younger and when I started, and I remember when I started in the job, I came from the Windows PC because that I had it home for gaming, and then we were one of the first customers who bought an E10K. If somebody knows what that is, like a big Sun Solaris machine, and they said, "Oh, you can use that machine. You can be super happy." And then they open up a terminal for me, and that's it. Like it's $1 million machine, and I have a terminal, which I was not able to use VI at that point. So it was like, it was frightened. It was weird that way, but we were super excited in learning new things. But we, at the time, we still had like a host department, mainframe with COBOL and assembler. And in the Solaris team at that time in the company, we were the total hipsters because we had the Solaris and the Unix stuff and all the things. And we just wanted to do something great. So we were super excited to build something. But a problem that we had just like a dual vendor strategy at that point. And this is not a real picture. So what we had at the company was Sun, and it was like HP. So two of these systems, and the software provided for the platforms we can choose from, that is what we had. So we had big goals. So the IT department came up with a lot of things we should build on. E-commerce was the thing at the time where we just start to have our own web shop and all that stuff. So we planned accordingly and try to get things done on our platform. So what we wanted is like having a great architecture where we build out all our stuff. And then what we did, because there was the only choice we could do, we went to our vendors. And I remember whatever meeting we had with like the HP folks or Solaris folks at the time, they had a software for it. Whatever problem we had, there was a software they had. We said, take this, it will solve all your problems. And compared to the plans we had, this is where we ended up. So it was just a mess. So we had a good plan how to do it. And every time we tried to do something in a good way, we made it even worse, like fixing that software together we were heavily bound on, which is so cool that we have a German word for this. It's named Verschlimmbesserung. So Verschlimmbesserung means making things worse, trying to improve it. One of the, I think, most important German words you can learn. So it was really frustrating because we were really trapped in that world, in that ecosystem where we had like a couple of platforms available and the tools, and we were really super unflexible in the way how to move forward. So we had more ideas and more needs and wishes and everything to do, but we could not solve because there was no platform for it. And standards were a big problem and were an issue at the time because there was kind of standards in some way, and one thing which is like made a lot of things possible at the time were the POSIX standards. And POSIX, for example, defines that a Vim is available on the platform, how we deal with a file system. So the basic Unix things, which also then Linux took over. And that was super important because at the time, the GNU tools that were coming up. So Sun Free, where the platforms were super hype, where you get all the cool stuff, open source stuff available on your commercial system. And that was a change for us. So the GNU tools itself gave us the power to work with open source and our, let's say, vendor login boxes, and it was just fantastic. Even if you compare it to today, perhaps it's like, it sounds super lame, but it was at the time, it was really, really cool. Like being flexible, getting new software in, and the POSIX standard made it possible. And then Linux came up. So Linux was not allowed in the company at the time. Still, the web server was running in production on Linux under the desk because on the Solaris system we didn't get it to work. So we started. I remember we had one guy we were laughing because he was compiling kernels the whole day. That was pretty much his job. And then I forgot something. I have to recompile it. And at the time I never thought that Linux is being successfully. Perhaps next year is the year of the Linux desktop. But apart from that, now Linux is a standard we don't have to discuss. And it was just amazing because from that Solaris HPX, we come to the Linux world, and that was just an eye-opener. What's possible? It means you had like hundreds of CDs, a lot of trash, but there was so much software you had access to. It was free, there was a large community, and it was really fantastic to move out from like a vendor login infrastructure, software and hardware vendor field to that open world where you can run your Linux on your PC. So there was a lot of diversity in tools. You came in touch with other people on IRC and all that stuff, so people you never talked to before, and it was just fantastic. So for me at that time, that was like was mind-blowing, coming out from the trapped environment and have all that freedom of choice to do something else. Yeah, but well, time flies. A lot has happened since then. Like I said, the company I did my training then was broke, but hopefully not my fault, but more of the business model, I would think. So where we are now. Perhaps I think it's not as bad as the picture looks like where we are now. It means we still have fire and light up there. So passion leaders here. So since that openness and since that movement took place, a lot of happened in our industry. So Microsoft loved Linux. Means nowadays, like publicly accepted. Now we get it. They bought GitHub. It's fine. But think back 10 years. Nobody could imagine that at some point Microsoft is going down that path, and they do it because I guess not they want it because they need to do it because the market is forcing them to do so. And I'm happy about it. Don't get me wrong. But if you think back, it's really hard to imagine that it will be that way as well. We have more open source than ever. So we have so much open source out there in the ecosystem, on GitHub, on all the different platforms. So there's a lot going on in the open source world. But what problem do we have, in my opinion, is where we're moving our data center infrastructure. So this is like a report for Logic Monitor. There are like hundreds of reports out there. You can find different data with every statistical data, but I think it's on average, it was the kind of data I found significantly true. This is where we are now. We have a lot in the public cloud, and you see that we have a massive growth rate in the public cloud where we move away from on-premise systems by 10% just in the next year. So the trend is there. I don't know, who of you is in the public cloud? Or perhaps not you, but your computers or your infrastructure? It's like 60%? Okay, that's pretty much not reflecting that bar anymore. Germany is super conservative by law and by mindset, so still a lot of companies have to or are still in on-premise and in private. But if you go, I don't know, to other countries, like they go for all public cloud strategy. Then you can say, okay, this is the time. This is how it is. We're moving forward. People like sell their on-premise stuff. We had an interesting Ignite yesterday about like power consumption and how we can save power if we use like centralized resources, which makes sense in my opinion, absolutely. But where's the problem? The problem for me is that open source does not mean it's an open standard. So we have open source like we never had before, but we're losing open standards because all the vendors out there, they don't have a unified standard. There is none. They have an API, but an API is not an open standard. And sometimes I'm curious when I talk to people say, yeah, I never thought about it because I thought since this is an API, it's a standard, but it really is not. It means they have all their stuff, and there are standards out there like OCCI. Somebody ever heard about OCCI? It's like an open cloud computing interface. You can see how popular it is. Nobody cares about it. It's like at some point they try to create a standard how like you start virtual machines, how you manage your network and resources and all that stuff. But it was not fast enough. Like standards are slow because they need some time that you need to align on. You would need people get together and find a good way. So it's super hard to get people on board for a standard. So what we have now is a very unbalanced market. And compared to the first one, this is the real picture of Seattle Airport. If you go on Delta check-in and you're working for AB, you can go there. Otherwise, you stand in line and wait. This is reality now for airport, but I think in some way it's true for the internet as well. So the unbalanced market is my point I would like to make here. So what we see is like the biggest growth rate currently in public cloud environment is Azure. I don't know exactly the reason. My opinion is they have the strongest sales expertise and the strongest like customer base, which is the big advantage compared to Amazon. Because they know pretty much every like small, medium CTO company. They played with him golf, or they just have the business relationship. I think for Microsoft, it's just easier to enter that market and get new customers on board. That's why I could imagine that Azure is outgrowing Amazon in 2 to 3 years. Nobody knows, but I can think so, that Azure will be keeping up with that. Then we see Google at some point, and then we see Alibaba is down there. Some others, but I think they are not really relevant. So we have, and I think we are heading towards a market where we have 2 to 3 big competitors like sharing the customer base, and it will be at some point like in telecommunication, just a market where you try to pull customers from the other environment to your environment, like helping them or paying the migration for them. Still, there is a lot of customers to get in the on-premise market. You can soak in the cloud. But at some point, there's like everybody's in there. There will be a more competitive fight for new customers and to get them on board. So this is where we are currently, 2019. Perhaps this slide needs an update next year. Of course it does. So what is the problem then? There are no standards. So in all that cloud environments, there are no real standards. They all have their own API, they have their own stuff. You work with it, they at some point have their own tools you can work with. And there are tools to solve that problem. For example, Terraform, which, cheers to Anton, which is my Terraform #1. Terraform is the most popular automation software on the market right now because it fills that gap. It fills that hole between there's no standards. Even if you played with Terraform, you know that you can take exactly the AWS definition and put that to Google Cloud. So you have to do your individual things. But Terraform fills that gap between having kind of a standardized way to talk to the cloud resources, which is one of the reasons it's so successful. And it has a big impact on open source. Because imagine the revenue model a traditional open source company has is usually that they have some open source and then they have an open core model and an enterprise module or whatever. So it's important for an open source company, which often open source, let's say in the old world, was heavily related to open standards because they try to work together and try to be successful with open standards and need some money revenue. In the new world, this way is cut off. Means if you buy your MongoDB database at Amazon, there's no single dollar, euro, whatever MongoDB can make through that business because the revenue stream is cut off where previously customers bought an enterprise license at MongoDB, which make them able to pay their people and keep their business on top. There are good and evils in that field. There are different ways to do it. So for example, if you buy an Elastic service at Google Cloud, they buy a back support at Elastic, so you have still the single interface. You can open up a ticket at Google, and they give Elastic money for using their software, which is the way to do it. I think there are different ways to do it. I'm not saying I know the best way to do it, but I think at some point we have the responsibility in the industry that everybody in the chain who is producing something has a chance and a right to get his shares at some point. And this is not true anymore because that market balanced away, and also the software providers and the software creators are encapsulated by the cloud software, that they have a low motivation even investing in open standards because the user itself doesn't see it anymore. Means imagine if you have a not standardized API you use, at some point it's totally unimportant if you use open source software underneath because you don't know. It could be a heterogeneous piece of software because you're using just an API, and if it's an open standard, open source, it's getting more and more irrelevant in the future. So where it leads us to? It leads us to fear and protection in the market. So a couple of open source companies have a problem or figured that they have a problem in the future and came up with different ways to do it. For example, new licenses like the Mongo or Redis, they brought up new open source licenses which prevent public cloud companies to use their software in a specific version. I don't know if it's good, and honestly I don't like that now everybody is coming up with a new software license. But in general, I get the problem that companies try to figure out a way, how can we have a sustainable business model in the future? Because right now we live from that specific enterprise customer who gives us money, but the connection to that customer is cut off. We don't see that customer anymore. We're just having something else who is absolutely having the power, also developing the product away from the standard, which is also happening, that you see that specific open source and open standards in the cloud are modified in a way that it's even harder to pull your data out, even if pulling data out is crazy expensive. If somebody ever tried to pull data out of the public cloud, it's crazy expensive. But even at some point you can't do anymore because the features that you have here, also with an open source tool, you don't have in the public version because they're not contributing back everything. So open source and standards need support, and support it's money. So they need money at some point to have a sustainable business model. And I'd just like to bring that up to people often think open source is being developed in the couch at night And this is not true. Perhaps open source products start that way, that somebody has a great idea at home. But open source is driven by companies, and they need to pay their people, and the revenue model and the direct connection to the customers in some ways in danger. So where's the future? So this is a little bit, where we now? I think where we now? I don't know where the future is. I think we are just at the beginning somewhere, because now, like, infrastructure as a service is gone. Everybody got it. Like, we're now moving more to a function as a service world, which creates a more and more tight integration to your public cloud. Because, I don't know, if you have a multi-cloud strategy, and there are different opinions if that's smart or not smart, it's still possible in some way to move your Kubernetes infrastructure from one cloud provider to another, or move your EC2 instance and put them to Azure. If you go to the function of the service world, it's pretty much impossible. Impossible with everything, but it's like the way of money. It costs to like get your very tightly FIS service using application, get it out and modify it to the way that you could another function as a service model, which is one of the reasons why it's so important. Still, the big cloud providers make most of the revenue out of like the traditional like instance and resource business. But I think, and what I don't know, everybody's in like a bubble. If you go to the DevOps days, you are in a bubble. If you go to another conference, you're in the bubble. But if I try to learn, and if I read through and I look where we are going to, I see that a lot of people who are in the public cloud are seeking for more and more also try to use the function as a service business, that they don't have to take care about their own like message bus anymore and just use the standard provided service. Is it all bad? I don't know. Means I have the discussion often, even like not when I'm talking about it here, but when we talk in the company with friends or something. Is it all evil? I would say, well, no. It's just a question how much risk and what you see in the world. So convenience, and the convenience we have with an iPhone, and I'm sorry, I have one too, is a risk. It's a risk because you are locked in a system. If you have an iPhone and you buy your apps and you go somewhere else, your money is gone because it's in the App Store. And it's the same with the public cloud. So it has a lot of advantages, and it has a lot of ways. And even if I have a startup company, if I have a great business idea today, I would probably not hire 2 ops guys, ops folks, and would like to, I don't know, order a data center area. I would just use some web services that I can start quickly. But I would also think like login is a risk too. And my impression is on the market that we don't see that risk anymore, or a lot in our industry don't see that risk. Where does it bring us? Even like traditional German companies, I know like big enterprises sold their whole data centers, moved everything to AWS, and now they figured out that their applications do not run there. Now they rent their data centers back, pay double amount of money, which they paid previously, because they thought it's the best way to do it. And I think the risk analysis at that point, and I think we had that yesterday, that risk analysis doesn't make sense. I think you're talking about that. But well, it means for enterprise, I think you have some responsibility. You should think about what happens if I drop my knowledge in some area, if I drop my independence in some area, what does it mean? And I think for like the basic compute power you have, this is not always required. It's not the only single way to do it going somewhere else. I totally get it if you would like to spin up 200 machines for a CI/CD and like erase them 5 minutes later. Public cloud is perfect because it doesn't make sense to have the resources in your data center. But for the basic workload, is it really the best way to do it? Is it the only way? And I have the feeling that our industry is kind of afraid, like with the Kubernetes hype train. We have to do it. If we don't do it, we miss it. We miss the chance. We have to go. And I think, yeah, perhaps you have, but you don't have to. So you can think about other opportunities which can be great for you. Again, slowness is a risk too. So if you have a great idea, like I said before, and you build up your own data center stuff and hire your ops folks, it's of course also a risk because it doesn't help you if you have a great open on-premise infrastructure and your idea is gone because somebody else is going up with that idea anyway, then it does not help you that you're thinking very smart about risk and vendor login and all that stuff. So it brought us to a way that right now priority cloud cost optimization is priority number 1 at every big company. Which is the funny thing, because when people go And there's a lot of studies. I don't want to blame you with more charts anymore. I don't want to bore with it. But there are a lot of charts out there where you say, when you go to the cloud, it's like 20-30% more expensive at the beginning. But then you bring, like, if you have the right sizing and if you have the right cost team in place, you can reduce your costs down to 10 or 20% less than on-premise. And then you're asking, did you have like a right fit or cost-reduced team when you have been on-premise? It's like, no, we had not, because we just ordered a server and we put it in. So why don't think about costs and resources and the right fit of your infrastructure while you're still in another world? Pricing, another good thing. So if you talk about the money, the argument is always like, it's always been cheaper. They never increase the pricing. It's always going to be down and down and down. But now we are still in the phase where, like, the public cloud providers are soaking in customers, and they don't care about the standards. They want to bind their users to their API into their infrastructure, which I get it, it's the business model, and it's way more than smart to say use more functions and use all my stuff that it's even harder for you to go out. But pricing in an oligopoly is tricky at some point where all the customers are shared through their providers. So think about a dose of insulin in the United States. In 2006, one dose of insulin cost about $67. Now it costs $285 because only 3 companies are controlling that market. And there are a couple of great episodes from John Oliver last week tonight. You can look into it. It's crazy because the market is not controlled, pricing is not controlled. There are only 3 vendors on the market that provide insulin, which, by the way, costs like $0.50 to produce. They make a shitload of money, which ends up that people die there because they're not able to buy the dose of insulin anymore. And this is not, perhaps you can say, okay, you cannot compare insulin to a public cloud pricing. But I can. You can see it, I can do it. I don't know if it's true, but I can. And perhaps in 10 years I was wrong, and you can think, you remember this old fart talking about that stuff? Crazy stuff. But perhaps think about it. And pricing in a monopolistic way is always the same. It's not related to like cloud or pharma industry or steel production or cars. Every time when a market is controlled by a couple of companies, it has a big influence on the pricing, on how they see their customers. It's every time. It's not a rule of IT. It's a rule of economics. It's like readable 200,000 times. So abuse of power comes by no surprise. So just think about if all that what we have now, which is like named the internet, is in control of 3 companies, where will we end up at the time? Governments are in place who control it. I'm worried, honestly, that all the B3 cloud providers are under control of one government. This is the German Bundestag, which is sometimes also crazy. But what happens now is like all the big 3 cloud providers under control of the US government. This is reality. I'm not bashing the US government, don't get me wrong, this is not today. But it's a thing, think about it. It's a sheep from Venezuela. So Venezuela was a couple of weeks ago was banned by an executive order in an embargo where cloud services were not able to serve Venezuela anymore. So for example, everyone in Venezuela using the Adobe Cloud, they had no access to their software anymore. They have no access to their data anymore because the executive order prevents American companies to serve Venezuela. If you are in a country where you're not able to get cloud services right now, you don't have a problem because you're not used to it. You never had a chance to use them. But if you are heavily relying on a cloud infrastructure where another government can like turn you off, sorry, but you're fucked up. Then you really have a problem. And I have the feeling that we don't see that concern. So we have to think about, we need a balanced market. I think we totally need public cloud. Don't get me wrong, absolutely. It is the future that public cloud, it's a commodity that I buy IT resources somewhere. But I think we have to make sure that we have a balanced market. Europe is so bad in like coming up with their own cloud ideas. So I don't know what we're doing. We're talking about Brexit all the time. I don't know why why Europe is missing the chance to doing something, I know that somebody else said there are 10 reasons why we're missing the chance. But we have nothing. We are totally not part of that market, not of that world. And I think it's important that we make sure that we get a balanced market here again. So what can you do? So it means I talked about like 20 minutes now, what is, in my opinion, is like not correct. So be reasonable. So if you think about what you're doing, where your IT strategy is heading to, think about where do I need the public cloud perhaps? Where can I use a local IT provider, even if I don't want to do it in-house? I guess there are tons of good IT providers in Norway, or in Sweden, or in Germany, or whatever. Perhaps they can solve your problem as well. Perhaps they don't have the hot, fancy function as a service should, but perhaps you don't need it. So think about how independent would you like to be, and how important is the topic to you. Interoperability is super important. So try to think what is required for me to be flexible with my environment. 10 years ago, everybody was like, multi-vendor strategy. This was the thing in IT. We need to have a multi-vendor strategy because if somebody pisses on us off, we can do something else. Multi-vendor strategy nowadays is like often totally forgotten. So this is super important that you have that chance. Support the variety. So try to support different vendors, different companies, different data providers. Try to be flexible in your environment. Demand contribution. Go to your cloud provider. And I know means if you are a small company, they don't care. But if you have in a big company, you have influence, you have your account manager, and demand that they be part of that business and they participate in that world, and try to make sure that we have a sustainable business model, that we have open standards in the future, and we have a chance that the IT world can work together, even if it's like in vendor A, B, C, and even our smaller companies have a chance to contribute. Because at some point, like imagine the internet is a highway. If 85 or 90% of that highway is owned by 3 companies, think about how fast can you drive. With you small data center provider, you are somewhere, you get the small, you know the highways and the small street beside the highways? This is the highway you will drive because you have no chance to get on the interstate anymore because it's like, it's gone, the market is gone here. Doubt, at some point, because it always sounds like super fantastic and it's the only way to do. So perhaps something like, okay, really, is it really true? Search for the opposite on Google. Don't search for why is it great, search for why is it bad. To not go into this self-service bias and see other things which can help you getting new ideas and perspective. Diversity is up to us, it's up to you. So we as customers need to demand what we want. We need to make sure that we have an open world. If it's important, perhaps we all, or you all figure out, I don't care, fair enough. To me it's important, but then we have to demand it. We have to take action and we have to make sure that we have these open standards and we have an open world where different systems can work together in the future. And I would love to encourage you to perhaps think about it for 5 minutes. That would be fantastic. Thank you for your time. Thanks.